I found my son sleeping in his car in the freezing cold at an airport parking lot with his twin boys huddled in the back seat. I knocked on the glass and asked him one simple question. Where is the $150,000 I gave you for your business? He broke down and told me his wife took everything, kicked him out, and claimed he was mentally unstable. My blood ran cold, but not from the winter air. It was from a rage I had not felt in 40 years. I told him to pack his things because we were going to fix this right now. But before I tell you how I took down a family of con artists who thought they could outsmart a retired forensic auditor, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your family from a betrayal you never saw coming. My name is Augustus Mercer, but everyone calls me Gus. I am 72 years old, and for most of my life people thought I was just a boring man who stared at spreadsheets. They did not know that for 4 decades I tracked down embezzlers for the federal government. I retired to a quiet life thinking my fighting days were over. I was wrong. It was 1 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday in February. The wind was cutting through my coat like a knife as I walked through the long-term parking lot at JFK Airport. I had tracked my son Logan's phone here after he stopped answering my calls 3 days ago. I found his old sedan parked in the furthest corner of Lot 4. It was covered in a thin layer of snow. I shined my flashlight through the window and my heart stopped. In the back seat, my 5-year-old grandsons Leo and Sam were curled up together under a single coat asleep. In the front seat, my son Logan was slumped over the steering wheel. He looked like a ghost. I did not cry, I did not scream. I tapped on the glass with my flashlight. The sound was sharp and loud in the silence. Logan jumped up, his eyes wide with terror. When he saw it was me, the look of shame on his face was worse than the fear. He rolled down the window. The air inside the car was freezing. I put my hand against the dashboard vents. They were ice cold. "Why is the heater not running, Logan?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "I ran out of gas 3 hours ago, Dad." That sentence hit me harder than any punch I had ever taken. My son, a brilliant software engineer, a man I had raised to be strong and independent, was freezing in a parking lot because he could not afford gas. I pulled Leo and Sam out of the back seat, wrapping them in my own coat. We walked to my truck in silence. I drove them to a 24-hour diner. The boys ate pancakes like they hadn't seen food in days. I watched them eat my coffee untouched. Logan sat opposite me, staring at the table. He looked 10 years older than his 32 years. "Now, Logan," I said, keeping my voice low. 6 months ago, I transferred $150,000 to your joint account. It was for your startup. Where is it?" Logan flinched. "It never made it to the company account, Dad. Rachel said we should put it in her parents' account for tax optimization. She said her father Carter had a way to shield it." I closed my eyes. Tax optimization, the oldest lie in the book. And then 2 days ago, I came home and the locks were changed. She told me I was having a paranoid episode. She told me to leave or she would call the police. I tried to reason with her, but her father came out. Carter told me to get lost before he pressed charges for trespassing. I had nowhere to go. She froze the joint account. I listened to every word and the picture became clearer. This was not a marital spat. This was a hostile takeover. I booked a suite at a hotel near the airport. It was warm. It was safe. Logan gave me his phone. I opened his messages. It was a stream of psychological warfare from Rachel Sinclair. "You are sick, Logan. Do not come back here. My parents say you need help. We are filing for full custody. You are homeless and unstable. No judge will give you the kids." I took out a small leather notebook from my inside pocket. I wrote down the date and time of every message. I was building a timeline. Logan watched me. "Dad, you don't understand. The Sinclairs are powerful. Carter knows people. They have money." I looked at my son, Logan, I said. Carter Sinclair does not have money. People with real money do not steal from their son-in-law. They are predators, and they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They assumed I was just a senile old man who sends checks. They forgot what I used to do for a living. I waited until he slept, then I dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. "O'Malley," I said. "It's Gus. I need a surveillance team. Full package. Financial, physical, digital. Starting at 7 a.m. tomorrow. I want to know exactly where my money went." The next morning, I bought Logan a suit. We walked into the bank branch an hour later. The teller looked at us with polite indifference. "We need to see the transaction history for the last 12 months on the Mercer joint account," Logan said. The teller typed, "I am sorry, sir. There is a flag on this account. Pending legal review regarding capacity. We cannot release information." Logan slumped. I stepped forward. "Young lady, please tell your branch manager that Augustus Mercer is here. Tell him I would like to discuss the liability of this institution in facilitating elder financial abuse and spousal fraud." 2 minutes later, we were sitting in the manager's office. The manager, Mr. Henderson, looked nervous. He knew my reputation. I studied his face. "My son has been defrauded. I want to see the statements. Now." Henderson printed them out. I took out my red pen. It took me 5 minutes to find the story the numbers were telling. $50,000 transferred to a luxury car dealership 3 months ago. $30,000 to a high-end medical spa. And then a series of transfers, $7,000 each, sent to an entity called Sinclair Consulting. I showed the paper to Logan. 50,000. That is a Porsche. Carter bought a Porsche last month, Logan whispered. He told me he got a bonus. I pointed to the spa payments. Victoria got a facelift, Logan said, his face pale. They have been stripping you for months, Logan. The transfers to Sinclair Consulting were structured to be just under the reporting limit. That is a federal crime. I looked at Henderson. Who owns Sinclair Consulting? He tapped his keyboard. It is a Shell LLC registered to Carter Sinclair's residential address. I stood up. The rage was cold now. It was a tool. We walked out of the bank. They stole everything, Dad, Logan said. I put my hand on his shoulder. They left a paper trail, Logan. Now we are going to pay them a visit. We drove to the house I helped them buy. The driveway was full of expensive cars. Music was coming from the backyard. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and they were having a party. I told Logan to stay in the car. I walked up the driveway. Carter Sinclair opened the door holding a glass of scotch. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket. When he saw me, he smiled with pure arrogance. Well, well, if it isn't Gus. Come to collect your wayward son's belongings. I'm afraid we threw most of it in the trash. I looked at Carter's wrist. He was wearing a gold Rolex Daytona. Brand new. Nice watch, Carter, I said. About $50,000 on the gray market. Carter puffed out his chest. I have done well for myself, Gus. Smart investments, unlike your son. The boy is disturbed. We are doing him a favor by cutting him loose. I memorized the layout of the room behind him. The expensive champagne, the catering staff. I was doing a mental inventory of my stolen money. You are right, Carter, I said softly. Investments can be tricky. Enjoy the party. I turned around and walked away. Carter laughed. While I was talking to him, I had dropped a high-range listening bug into the large planter urn by the front door. I got back in the car and handed the earpiece to Logan. Put this on. We drove around the corner and listened. Voices crackled through the static. It was Carter and Victoria. Can you believe the nerve of that old man, Carter said, coming here in that beat-up truck? Thank God we got rid of them. Speaking of Rachel, Carter said, his voice dropping lower. Did you transfer the rest of the funds to the offshore account? We need to move it before the divorce filing hits the court system. Victoria sighed. I moved $80,000 this morning. The rest is in cash in the safe. We need that for the gala on Saturday. If we land this deal with the Sterling Group, we won't need Logan's pennies anymore. Carter chuckled. That idiot. He actually thought we were investing in a startup. He funded our lifestyle for 2 years. And the best part is if he tries to sue, we have Dr. Phipps lined up to testify he is paranoid. Who believes a crazy man over a respected family? I looked at Logan. His face was white. They are going to claim I am crazy, Dad. I started the car. They have a crooked Dr. Logan. And they have a gala on Saturday. A gala where they are looking for investors. My mind was racing. I was already forming the plan. It was dangerous, but I had spent 40 years taking down men smarter than Carter Sinclair. We are going back to the hotel, I said. I need to make a call to an old friend in the FBI. Because on Saturday night, we are going to that gala. And we are going to give the Sinclairs a presentation they will never forget. I drove the truck in silence until the neon sign of a 24-hour diner cut through the snowstorm. It was a place for truckers and insomniacs. The kind of establishment where nobody asks why you are bringing 2 freezing children in at 1 a.m. We slid into a cracked red vinyl booth in the back corner. The heat inside was blasting, but my son was still shivering. Leo and Sam looked at the laminated menus with eyes so wide it broke my heart. They ordered everything they recognized. Pancakes, eggs, bacon toast. When the waitress brought the food, they ate like starving animals. I watched my 5-year-old grandsons devour syrup-soaked waffles with trembling hands, and a cold, hard fury settled in my gut. I did not touch my black coffee. I just stared at my son. Logan sat across from me, huddled in his coat, refusing to make eye contact. He looked 10 years older than the 32-year-old man I knew. His hands were shaking, not just from the cold, but from the shame of a man who has failed to protect his pack. I waited until the boys were distracted by their food, before I leaned in. My voice was low, a rumble that only he could hear. Logan, look at me. 6 months ago, I liquidated my retirement fund. I transferred $150,000 to your joint account. It was everything I had saved from 40 years of chasing financial criminals. It was for your software startup. Where is that money? Logan flinched as if I had slapped him. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve, his eyes darting around the diner. It never made it to the company account, Dad, he whispered. The shame in his voice was thick enough to choke on. Rachel said we needed to be smart. She said if we put it directly into the business account, we would get hit with immediate corporate taxes before we even launched. She suggested we put it in her parents' account temporarily. I felt a vein in my forehead throb. Her parents' account. Carter and Victoria Sinclair. People who wore designer clothes but never seemed to have a verifiable income source. And you believed her? I asked, my voice flat. Logan nodded miserably. She said Carter had a way to shield the assets. She called it tax optimization. She said her father was doing us a favor by holding it in a trust until we were ready to buy equipment. Tax optimization. The oldest lie in the fraudster handbook. There is no such thing as shielding startup capital in the personal account of a third party to avoid taxes. It is called embezzlement. It is called theft. My son, a brilliant coder who could build complex algorithms, had been played by a con artist using basic financial gibberish. And the startup, I asked, did you buy any equipment? Did you rent office space? Logan shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. No. Every time I asked for a withdrawal, Rachel said it wasn't the right time. She said the market was volatile. She said I needed to perfect the code first. And then 2 days ago, I came home from the library and my key didn't work. He stopped, taking a jagged breath. I leaned closer. Tell me exactly what happened, Logan. She changed the locks, Dad. I knocked and she opened the door just a crack. She threw a garbage bag at me. It had 3 shirts and my laptop. She told me I was having a paranoid episode. She said I was hallucinating about the money, that I never gave her anything. She said I was dangerous around the boys. She told me to leave or she would call the police and have me committed. I looked at my grandsons, their faces sticky with syrup, oblivious to the fact that their father had been gaslighted into homelessness. Rachel hadn't just stolen the money. She had rewritten reality to cover her tracks. She kicked him out to prevent him from asking questions. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter, just like the truth. So you have been living in your car for 48 hours, while your wife sits in the house I helped pay for spending my retirement money. Logan nodded, a single tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. I didn't want to call you. I didn't want you to know I was this stupid. You are not stupid, son, I said, pulling out my leather notebook. You are just kind. And kindness is a fatal weakness when you are dealing with sharks. But luckily for you, I stopped being kind a long time ago. The suite at the airport hotel was sterile and beige, but it had 2 things my son had not experienced in days: central heating and a locking door. I watched Leo and Sam collapse onto the pull-out sofa, their small bodies exhausted from the trauma of sleeping in a freezing car. Within minutes, their breathing leveled out into the deep rhythm of childhood sleep. I covered them with a duvet, then turned to the small table by the window where Logan was sitting. He was staring at his hands, his shoulders hunched as if he expected the ceiling to cave in on him. Give me your phone, I said. It was not a request. Logan hesitated, his hand hovering over his pocket. Dad, you do not want to see what is on there. It is embarrassing. She says things that, well, maybe I did act crazy when I found out the money was gone. Maybe I scared her. I held out my hand, palm up, waiting. Give me the phone, Logan. He pulled out his cracked smartphone and unlocked it. I took it and sat down across from him. I opened the messaging app and scrolled to the conversation with Rachel. It was not a conversation. It was a monologue of cruelty. I started reading from the moment he was kicked out. Monday, 4 to 12 p.m. Rachel wrote, Do not come back here. My parents and I agree that you are having a manic episode. You are not safe to be around the children. I looked at Logan. He flinched. I kept scrolling. Monday, 6:30 p.m. If you try to contact the bank again, I will file a harassment suit. You are delusional, Logan. There is no money. You imagined it. You need professional help. Tuesday, 2 a.m. This was while he was freezing in the parking lot. If you bang on this door, I am calling 911. I will tell them you threatened to kill me. I will tell them you are violent. Do not test me. I felt a cold fire in my chest. This was not the anger of a wife. This was the calculated strategy of a predator. She was not just texting him. She was creating a digital paper trail. She was manufacturing evidence for a custody hearing, painting a picture of a man losing his mind so that when she stole everything, no one would believe his version of the story. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out my old leather notebook. It was battered, the spine cracked from years of use in federal courtrooms. I uncapped my pen and flipped to a fresh page. I wrote the date at the top. Then I began to transcribe the messages, noting the timestamps to the minute. What are you doing? Logan asked, his voice trembling. I am building a timeline. I said, writing down the threat about the 911 call. In my line of work, we call this establishing intent. She is gaslighting you, son. She is trying to provoke a reaction so she can record it and show it to a judge. She wants you to scream. She wants you to bang on the door. She wants you to look crazy so she can justify stealing $150,000. I looked up from the notebook. Did you threaten her? No, Logan whispered. I just cried. I begged her to let me inside to get the boys. I told her I would sleep on the floor. I wrote that down too. Logan's response. Timestamps. The silence from her end until the next threat. This was not a marriage ending. This was a crime scene, and the evidence was right here in glowing blue bubbles. She is banking on you being too ashamed to fight back, I said, closing the notebook with a snap. She thinks you are weak. She thinks I am just an old man who writes checks and watches television. She has no idea that she just handed us the first nail for her coffin. I put the phone on the table between us. We are not going to reply to her. We are not going to give her the reaction she wants. Silence terrifies a narcissist more than shouting ever could. Get some sleep, Logan. Tomorrow we stop being victims. Tomorrow we start the audit. Logan stood by the sofa looking down at his sleeping sons. His hands were gripping the back of a chair so hard his knuckles were white. I am worthless, Dad. He whispered, his voice cracking in the quiet hotel room. I let this happen. I let her take everything. I am a grown man, and I cannot even put a roof over my children's heads without my father rescuing me. I am pathetic. I watched him and felt a physical ache in my chest. This broken, trembling man was not the son I raised. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw him as he was 5 years ago. Logan was brilliant. He graduated top of his class from Caltech. He was a lead software architect at 26. He could spot a bug in a line of code from across the room. He was confident. He was sharp. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and owned it. But the man standing in front of me now was a shell. Rachel hadn't just stolen his money. She had stolen his mind. Over 5 years, she had systematically dismantled him. It is a technique I saw criminals use on whistleblowers all the time. It is called gaslighting. She made him doubt his memory. She made him doubt his competence. She isolated him from his friends, telling him they didn't really like him. She criticized his parenting until he was afraid to hold his own children. She convinced a genius that he was an idiot. A surge of anger rose in my throat. It was a hot, bitter bile. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. I wanted to scream at him to stand up, to fight back, to stop acting like a victim. I wanted to ask him how he could let a woman and her grifter parents treat him like a dog in his own house. The words were right on the tip of my tongue. Be a man, Logan. But I swallowed them. I looked at his slumped shoulders, and I realized that yelling at him now would be like kicking a wounded soldier. He wasn't weak. He was injured. Rachel Sinclair was a professional manipulator, and Carter and Victoria were her coaches. They had 5 years to plant the landmines in his head. I couldn't clear them all in one night. If I yelled at him, I would just be another voice telling him he wasn't good enough. Go to sleep, son, I said instead, keeping my voice level. We cannot fix the past at 3 in the morning, but we can secure the future when the sun comes up. Logan nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve like a child. He lay down on the other bed without taking off his shoes. Within minutes, the exhaustion took him, and he passed out. I walked to the window and looked out at the snowy runway in the distance. The red lights of the control tower blinked in the darkness. I was not tired. My mind was a machine processing data, calculating risks. I needed intel. I knew what they did, but I needed to know what they were doing right now. I picked up the hotel phone. I did not care what time it was. In my line of work, the best people didn't sleep. I dialed a number I still knew by heart. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. O'Malley, the voice said. It sounded like he had been smoking a cigar while gargling whiskey. It is Gus, I said. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Gus Mercer. I thought you were retired. I thought you were fishing in Florida. I tried that, I said. The fish were too honest. I have a job for you, Mike. It is personal. Personal jobs are expensive, Gus. I have the money. I need a full surveillance package. 3 targets. Carter Sinclair, Victoria Sinclair, and Rachel Sinclair. I gave him the address. What are we looking for? O'Malley asked. Asset movement, I said. Lifestyle patterns, who they talk to, where they go, and Mike, I need to know who their doctor is. You want a tail on them, Mom? I want a shadow on them. I want to know what they eat for breakfast. I want a team on site by 7 a.m. Can you do it? 7 a.m., O'Malley said. You will have photos by noon. Welcome back to the game, Gus. I hung up the phone. I looked at my sleeping son and grandsons. They looked peaceful, unaware of the war I had just declared. Rachel and her parents thought they had won. They thought they had broken the Mercer family. They were about to find out that while they broke the son, they woke up the father. And the father was not happy. I was up before the sun. The city was still waking up, a gray sludge of melting snow and traffic noise, but I was already moving. I walked to a department store 3 blocks away the moment the doors unlocked. I did not browse. I moved with the efficiency of a man on a mission. I bought 3 suits, 2 small navy blue ones for Leo and Sam because dignity starts with how you present yourself to the world, and a sharp charcoal gray wool suit for Logan. I bought crisp white shirts, silk ties, leather shoes, and a shaving kit. When you are preparing to walk into a lion's den, you do not wear the clothes of a victim. You wear the armor of a warrior. I returned to the hotel room with the bags rustling in my hands. The boys were still asleep, a tangle of limbs under the duvet. But Logan was awake. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank television screen, his posture slumped like a man waiting for a sentencing hearing. He looked at the bags, then at me, confusion clouding his eyes. Get up, I said, tossing the heavy garment bag onto the bed beside him. Shower, shave, scrub that fear off your face. Then put this on. We are leaving in 45 minutes. Logan touched the fabric of the suit through the plastic. Dad, what is this? Where do you think we are going? We are homeless. We are broke. I should be looking for a shelter or a job, not playing dress-up. We are going to get your life back, I said, opening the curtains to let the harsh winter light flood the room. And we are going to do it looking like the men who own the building, not the men who clean it. He stood up, but he didn't move toward the bathroom. He started pacing, his hands pulling at his hair. You do not get it, Dad. You have been out of the game too long. You do not know who the Sinclairs are. Carter plays golf with the district attorney. Victoria is on the board of the charity that funds half the police department's equipment. They have connections that go deep. If we walk into that bank and start making noise, Carter will make one phone call and we will be the ones in handcuffs. We cannot win this fight. They are too big. I watched him spiral. It was the gaslighting talking. They had convinced him that they were gods, untouchable and omnipotent. They had made him believe that their social circle was a fortress that could not be breached. I let him finish. I let him pour out all the terror they had injected into him over 5 years. When he finally stopped, breathless and trembling, I walked over to him. I grabbed his shoulders and turned him toward the full-length mirror on the closet door. Look at yourself, Logan. Do you see a criminal? Do you see a crazy person? No. You see a father who loves his sons. You see a brilliant engineer who built something from nothing. They took your money and they took your house, but they only took your dignity because you handed it to them. Today, we take it back. Now go shave. 20 minutes later, he stepped out of the bathroom. The stubble was gone. The smell of stale car sweat was replaced by soap and peppermint. He put on the shirt. He pulled on the trousers. He looked like the man he was before he met Rachel. He looked like my son. But when he tried to tie, his fingers fumbled. He couldn't get the knot right. His hands were shaking too hard from the adrenaline and the fear. I swatted his hands away gently. Stop, I said. Let me. I stepped in close. I flipped the silk tie over, creating the knot with muscle memory that hadn't faded in retirement. I pulled it tight, centering it perfectly against his collar. I smoothed down the lapels of his jacket. I looked him dead in the eye, holding his gaze until he stopped trembling. Listen to me closely, Logan. Carter Sinclair has dinner parties. He has handshakes. He has favors he can call in. That is what you call connections. And sure, connections can open doors. But connections are based on people liking you or fearing you. They are fragile. I tightened the knot one last fraction of an inch. But I have something better than connections. I have 40 years of reading ledgers. I know how to track $1 from a checking account to a shell company in the Caymans. I know how to find the signature that doesn't match. I know how to find the receipt that shouldn't exist. They have connections, son. But I know the numbers. And let me tell you the one thing I learned in my career. People lie. Lawyers lie. Even judges lie. But numbers never lie. And right now their numbers are screaming a confession. Are you ready to listen? The sliding glass doors of the bank hissed open, unleashing a blast of climate-controlled air that smelled of floor wax and old money. I walked in first, my heels clicking on the marble floor with a deliberate rhythmic echo. Logan followed a step behind, tugging at the collar of his new shirt. He looked sharp in the charcoal suit, but his eyes were darting around the lobby like a cornered animal waiting for a trap to spring. We approached the teller station. The woman behind the glass, whose name tag read Jennifer, did not look up immediately. She was busy counting a stack of 20s, her movements bored and mechanical. When she finally raised her eyes, her gaze lingered on Logan's face. She didn't see the expensive wool suit. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, and the red-rimmed look of a man who hadn't slept in a bed for days. She made a judgment in a fraction of a second. I had seen that look 1,000 times. It was the look people give to those they deem irrelevant. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat, bordering on rude. Logan cleared his throat. "Yes. I am Logan Mercer. I hold a joint checking and savings account here with my wife, Rachel Sinclair. I need to print out the full transaction history for the last 12 months. Jennifer sighed a long, audible exhale through her nose. She typed something into her terminal, her acrylic nails clacking loudly against the keys. She squinted at the screen, then looked back at Logan with a smirk. "Sir, this account has a hold on it initiated by the primary account holder. There is a note here regarding potential unauthorized access. I cannot release any documents to you without Mrs. Sinclair present to verify your identity." Logan gripped the counter. "I am not unauthorized access. I am the joint owner. My name is on the account. Here is my license." He slid his ID under the glass. Jennifer didn't even touch it. She crossed her arms. "Sir, the note says the secondary holder is experiencing medical issues and may attempt to withdraw funds erratically. For your own protection, we require the primary holder's signature. If you don't leave, I will have to call security." I saw Logan crumble. His shoulders slumped. The gaslighting had worked so well that even a bank teller could push him around. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Let's go, Dad. It is over." I stepped forward, placing my leather notebook on the counter with a heavy thud. Jennifer looked at me, annoyed. "Excuse me, sir, are you with him?" "I am not just with him," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am his auditor. And you, Jennifer, are about to make a mistake that will cost this branch its charter." She blinked, confused. "Excuse me." I leaned in closer to the glass. "You are refusing a joint tenant access to his own financial records based on a hearsay note added by a spouse. That is a direct violation of the Right to Financial Privacy Act and federal banking regulations regarding joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. Unless you have a court order signed by a judge declaring my son mentally incompetent, your refusal to provide statements constitutes obstruction of financial transparency." I checked my watch. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get the branch manager out here." If you call security, I will call the FDIC and file a formal complaint for discriminatory practices and illegal account freezing, and I will make sure to spell your name correctly in the report." Jennifer's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the sudden, sharp fear of someone who realizes they have punched above their weight class. She picked up her phone, her hands shaking. "Mr. Henderson," she whispered into the receiver, "you need to come out here. Now." I looked at Logan. He was staring at me, stunned. I winked at him. "Never argue with the help, son. Always go for the person who has the keys to the vault." Mr. Henderson's office smelled of stale coffee and cheap cologne. He was a man in his mid-40s with a receding hairline and a suit that was trying too hard to look expensive. He sat behind his mahogany desk, clasping his hands together in a pose of practiced authority. He did not offer us a seat. He looked at Logan with the same dismissive pity the teller had shown, seeing only the exhaustion and the fear blind to the injustice. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "I understand you are frustrated. Domestic disputes regarding finances are always messy. However, bank policy is strict. Mrs. Sinclair has flagged this account for potential fraud by the secondary holder. Until our legal department clears it, my hands are tied. Perhaps you should come back next week when you have cooled down." He smiled, a thin, tight expression that didn't reach his eyes. He thought he was dismissing a nuisance. He thought he was protecting his branch from a liability. He had no idea he was standing on a landmine. I did not say a word. I reached into my pocket, but I did not pull out my wallet. Instead, I pulled out a slim silver card case I hadn't opened in 5 years. I flipped it open and extracted a single card. It was cream-colored heavy stock with embossed black lettering. It was old, the edges slightly yellowed, but the authority it carried never expired. I slid it across the polished desk. It spun perfectly, coming to a stop right in front of his clasped hands. "Read it," I said softly. Henderson sighed, annoyed by the theatrics. He looked down. I saw the moment his eyes focused on the text. I saw his pupils dilate. He read the name, Augustus Mercer. Then he read the title below it. Senior Forensic Auditor, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division, retired. He looked up and the color drained from his face so fast, he looked like he might faint. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the cold, clammy sweat of a man who realizes he has made a career-ending mistake. "I know you recognize the name, Mr. Henderson," said my voice, dropping an octave, filling the room with a heavy, dangerous calm. "You wrote a paper on the Keystone embezzlement case when you were in business school, didn't you? I was the one who found the hidden ledgers in the ceiling tiles. I was the one who put 3 bank managers in federal prison for facilitating the transfers. They told me their hands were tied too." Henderson swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "Mr. Mercer," he stammered, his voice trembling. I didn't know. It is an honor, sir. I truly didn't know this was your son." "Now you do," I said. "My son is the victim of a coordinated financial extraction. If you do not provide us with a full, unredacted transaction history for the last 24 months right now, I will not call the police. I will call my old friends at the Treasury Department. And by Monday morning, I will have a federal audit team tearing this branch apart, brick by brick. Do you want that kind of heat, Mr. Henderson?" He stood up so fast his chair hit the wall behind him. "No, sir. Absolutely not. I will print them myself, immediately." He rushed to the large laser printer in the corner of the office. He typed in his override code, his fingers fumbling over the keypad. Then the machine started. Whir, click, whir. The sound filled the silent office. To anyone else, it was just the noise of paper and toner. But to me, it sounded like the rhythmic mechanical slide of ammunition being loaded into a chamber. Zip, zip, zip. Sheet after sheet slid into the tray. Each page was a bullet. Each transaction was a weapon we would use to tear down the Sinclair empire. Logan looked at me, his eyes wide, seeing his father for the first time not as an old man, but as a predator who had just cornered his prey. I just stared at the printer, watching the evidence pile up. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. Henderson placed the stack of warm paper on the mahogany desk with a trembling hand. It was thick, hundreds of pages recording the slow, methodical bleeding of my son's life. I sat down and uncapped my red pen. It felt heavy and familiar in my hand, like a surgeon's scalpel. Logan stood behind me, his breath hitching in his throat, as I flipped to the first page. I started circling. The ink bled into the paper, marking the crime scenes. I did not need a calculator. The patterns were screaming at me. I pointed to a line item from 3 months ago. October 14th. Wire transfer. $50,000 to Prestige Motors of Greenwich. I looked at Logan. October. That was when Carter showed up to Sunday dinner in a new Porsche Cayenne, wasn't it? He told you he bought it with a performance bonus from his hedge fund. Logan nodded slowly, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He said he had a record quarter. He took me for a ride in it. He let me sit in the driver's seat. You paid for that ride, son, I said, circling the number again until the paper tore slightly. You bought that car. It wasn't a bonus. It was your startup capital. I flipped the page. November 2nd. $15,000 to Elite World Travel. Victoria went to Paris in November, didn't she? I asked. Logan's voice was a whisper. She said she was going to visit a sick aunt in Lyon. She said it was a family emergency. We sent her flowers. I slashed a red line through the transaction. You sent her on a 5-star vacation to the Four Seasons. There was no sick aunt, just a sick appetite for your money. But the worst was yet to come. I flipped through the last 6 months. I found a recurring payment that made my auditor's blood boil. Every Friday, like clockwork, there was a transfer of $9,000 to an entity called Sinclair Consulting Group. I tapped the paper hard. Look at this number, Logan. 9,000. Do you know why it is 9,000 and not 10,000? He shook his head, his eyes wide and unseeing. Because $10,000 triggers a currency transaction report to the federal government. I explain, my voice cold. It is called structuring. It is a federal crime designed to bypass anti-money laundering laws. They didn't just spend your money, they laundered it. They knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't an accident. It was a criminal enterprise operating out of your joint checking account. Logan leaned over the desk, his eyes scanning the smaller charges I had highlighted. $12,000 at a Hermes boutique. $400 at a sushi restaurant on a Tuesday. $2,000 at a day spa. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. It was the sound of a man's reality shattering. Dad, he choked out, pointing to a date in December. That day. That specific day. I asked Rachel if we could afford to put the twins in soccer lessons. It was $200. She told me we were broke. She told me I was bleeding the family dry with my business ideas. She made me return a pair of shoes I bought for work because she said we needed the money for milk and groceries. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. She bought a handbag for $12,000 on the same day she told me we couldn't afford milk. The room went silent, save for the hum of the ventilation. I looked at Mr. Henderson, who was staring at his shoes, ashamed to witness the destruction of a man's soul. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the cruelty. They hadn't just stolen from him. They had watched him struggle, watched him count pennies, watched him deny his children opportunities, all while they were drinking champagne on his dime. They had enjoyed it. I closed the folder. I capped my pen. The audit was done. The evidence was undeniable. They are vampires, Logan, I said softly. and we are going to drive a stake right through their heart. Grab the papers. We are leaving. We have a house to visit. We drove the rental car in silence, the heater humming against the winter chill, but the atmosphere inside was heavy enough to crush a man. We pulled onto Elm Street, the quiet suburban cul-de-sac, where Logan had bought his dream home 3 years ago. Or rather, the home he thought he had bought. According to the bank statements resting on the dashboard, he had essentially purchased a party venue for his in-laws. I killed the headlights a block away and let the car roll to a stop in the shadows of a large oak tree. Even from this distance, the house was impossible to miss. It was blazing with light, every window glowing golden against the dark evening. It didn't look like a house where a marriage had just ended in tragedy. It looked like a carnival. The driveway was packed. I counted 3 Mercedes, a Range Rover, and the Porsche Cayenne that I now knew my son had unwittingly paid for. They were parked haphazardly on the lawn, tearing up the grass Logan used to mow every Saturday. It was a display of casual disrespect that made my jaw tighten. "Look at them," Logan whispered. His voice was raw. He was staring at the bay window of the living room. The curtains were open, framing the scene like a stage play. Inside, people were mingling, holding crystal flutes. It was a cocktail party. On a Wednesday night, while the man who paid for the roof over their heads was sleeping in a hotel room with his children. I saw Rachel. She was standing in the center of the room wearing a black dress that I suspected cost more than my first car. Her head was thrown back in laughter. She looked radiant. She looked liberated. She raised her left hand to gesture at something, and the light from the chandelier caught it. A flash of brilliance sparked from her finger. It wasn't her wedding band. It was a new ring. A massive, ostentatious diamond that sat heavy on her hand. "She bought a ring," Logan choked out. He was gripping the door handle so hard the plastic creaked. "She told me she lost her wedding ring down the drain last month. She made me feel guilty for not insuring it. And now she is wearing that. That is my money on her finger, Dad. That is Leo and Sam's tuition." He unbuckled his seatbelt. The sound of the click was like a gunshot in the quiet car. "I am going in there," he said, his voice rising to a shout. "I am going to kick down that door, and I am going to scream the truth in front of every one of her high society friends. I am going to tear that ring off her finger." He reached for the door latch. He was halfway out of his seat, fueled by a righteous fury that had been suppressed for too long. I reached across the console and grabbed his shoulder. My grip was iron. I dug my fingers into his suit jacket, pinning him to the seat. "Stop," I commanded. My voice was not loud, but it was absolute. "Do not open that door. Let me go, Dad." Logan struggled, tears streaming down his face. "They are laughing at me. If you go in there right now, you lose," I hissed, looking him dead in the eye. "Look at that scene, Logan. Look at it. To them, you are the unstable, violent husband they have been warning everyone about. If you storm in there screaming, you are just proving their point. You will be arrested for trespassing and assault. You will give them the perfect evidence to take your children away forever. Is that what you want? Do you want to feel good for 5 minutes and lose your sons for a lifetime?" Logan stopped struggling. He slumped back against the seat, his breathing ragged. He looked at the house again, at his wife laughing with a glass of champagne surrounded by the vultures who were picking his bones clean. "Then what do we do?" he whispered. "Do we just watch?" "No," I said, releasing his shoulder and smoothing down his lapel. "We do not just watch, we collect. Tonight isn't a party, son. It is a crime scene. And they just invited us to gather the evidence. Stay in the car, keep the engine running. I am going to take a closer look." I told Logan to lock the doors. "If anyone tries to touch the car, you drive away." I didn't wait for an answer. I stepped out into the freezing night, buttoning my coat against the wind. The walk up the driveway felt like a march into enemy territory. The gravel crunched loudly under my boots, a stark, gritty contrast to the smooth jazz and laughter floating out from the open windows of the house. Carter Sinclair was standing on the porch, leaning against a white pillar like he was the lord of the manor surveying his estate. He was holding a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid, and his face was flushed with a mixture of alcohol and self-satisfaction. He saw me coming and he didn't even straighten up. He just took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, swirling the ice cubes with a lazy flick of his wrist. "Well, look who it is," he slurred slightly, his voice dripping with mock surprise and heavy with disdain. "Augustus Mercer, the retired bean counter. Did you get lost on the way to the pharmacy, Gus? Or did you come to beg for some welfare money for that psycho son of yours?" He laughed at his own joke, a wet, heavy sound that grated on my nerves. "I warned him, you know. I told him he wasn't cut out for this life. He is weak, unstable. Honestly, we did you a favor. Now you can put him in a facility where he belongs before he hurts someone. We are cleaning up the mess you raised." I stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at him. I didn't see a successful businessman. I saw a thief in a velvet smoking jacket. I saw a parasite who had fed on my son's kindness until there was nothing left. But mostly, I saw the fear hiding behind the bluster. He was trying too hard to be cruel, which meant he was nervous. He needed to assert dominance because deep down, he knew he was a fraud. I didn't respond to his insults. I didn't defend my son. Arguments are for people who think they might lose. I just let his words hang in the freezing air until the silence became uncomfortable. Then I focused my eyes on his left wrist. The sleeve of his jacket had ridden up as he drank, revealing a watch that gleamed under the porch lights. It wasn't just any watch. It was a masterpiece of Swiss engineering. A Patek Philippe Nautilus with a blue dial. Stainless steel. Impossible to get at retail without a 5-year waiting list. "That is a beautiful timepiece, Carter." I said, my voice conversational, almost friendly. Carter blinked, thrown off by the change in topic. He glanced down at his wrist and smirked, preening like a peacock. "You have a good eye for a government pensioner, Gus. It is a Nautilus, a gift to myself, for a record-breaking quarter." The reference 5711. I continued reciting the specs from memory. Discontinued. Market value is currently hovering around $120,000. Funny, that is almost exactly the amount that vanished from Logan's savings account last month after the transfer to the car dealership. Carter stopped smiling. The hand holding the glass stilled. The ice cubes stopped clinking. I took a step closer, resting one foot on the bottom stair, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "It is a stunning watch, Carter. Truly. I just hope you kept the receipt. Because when the IRS asks where a man with zero declared income got the cash for a 6-figure watch, you are going to need it. And trust me, Carter, they always ask." For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw the panic flare in his watery eyes. He pulled his sleeve down sharply, covering the watch, as if it burned his skin. The seed was planted. He wasn't just facing an angry father anymore. He was facing an audit. And he knew it. Carter's face turned a shade of purple that matched the velvet of his smoking jacket. He sputtered, trying to find a comeback, but the mention of the IRS hung in the cold air like toxic smoke. "Get off my property," he shouted, waving his glass so hard that amber liquid spilled onto his sleeve. "Get out before I call the cops and have you arrested for harassment." "I am going, Carter," I said, raising my gloved hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "I have seen enough." I turned my back on him and began to walk slowly down the steps. To him, I looked like a defeated old man retreating into the night. But I wasn't leaving just yet. I had one more deposit to make. To the right of the front door, nestled directly under the large bay window where the party was raging, stood a massive terracotta urn. It held a decorative spruce tree wrapped in twinkling white lights. It was the perfect blind spot. I reached into my deep coat pocket. My fingers closed around the cold, metallic disc O'Malley had given me. It was a high-frequency listening device no bigger than a quarter, with a battery life of 48 hours. I paused by the urn, pretending to adjust my scarf against the biting wind. "Tell Rachel I said hello," I called back over my shoulder, my voice carrying over the wind. Carter sneered from the porch. "She does not want to talk to you, Gus. She is done with your family. She won't have to talk to me," I murmured to myself. With a practiced flick of my wrist, a move I had used 100 times in corporate lobbies and executive offices, I dropped the device into the dense foliage of the spruce. It landed silently on the soil, hidden by the branches less than 3 feet from the open window frame. The microphone was live. The trap was set. I walked the rest of the way to the car without looking back. The gravel crunched rhythmically under my boots, and I could feel Carter's eyes boring into my back, watching me leave, thinking he had won the territory. He stood there on his porch, drinking his expensive scotch, completely unaware that he had just allowed a federal-grade wiretap onto his property. I opened the rental car door and slid into the passenger seat. A blast of warm air hit my face. Logan was gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his body tense as a wire. He looked at me, terrified. "Dad, what did you do?" he asked, his voice high and tight. I saw him yelling. "Did he threaten you? We have to go. They are going to call the police." I buckled my seatbelt with deliberate slowness. I checked my watch. "He isn't calling anyone, Logan. He is too busy worrying about whether I really know about his tax evasion. And he is going to need another drink to calm his nerves." "But what was the point?" Logan hit the steering wheel in frustration. "You just made him angry. Now they are going to come after us harder. We didn't get anything. We just stood there and took his insults." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black receiver unit. I flipped the switch on the side. A small red light blinked to life. Through the speaker, the sound of jazz music and clinking glasses filled the quiet car. It was crystal clear. Then Carter's voice cut through the static. "Can you believe that old fool?" we heard Carter say, clearly stepping back inside the house. "He thinks he can scare me." "Victoria, pour me another scotch. My hands are shaking." Logan stared at the black box, his mouth hanging open. He looked at the house, then back at the receiver. "Dad, are we listening to them?" "Drive, son," I said, leaning back against the headrest and closing my eyes. "The audit has officially begun. We aren't guessing anymore. Tonight they are going to tell us exactly where they hid the bodies, and we are going to enjoy every single word." The red light on the black receiver box blinked in the dim hotel room like a steady, unblinking eye. We sat in silence, Logan on the edge of the bed, and me in the armchair, staring at the device as if it were a bomb about to detonate. The static hissed, a white noise that filled the space between us, punctuated by the occasional pop of a signal interference. It was a ghost story told in real time. The party at the Sinclair house was winding down. The music had stopped, but the conversation we needed to hear was just getting started. Through the crackle, we heard the heavy thud of a sliding glass door closing and the distinct clinking of crystal decanters against glass. Carter's voice came through first, thick and slurred with expensive scotch. "Did you see his face, Victoria? Old man Mercer actually thought he could intimidate me with a receipt. He is nothing. He is a relic. He drives a truck that is worth less than my shoes." Victoria laughed, a sound like glass breaking on a tile floor. "He is just like his son. Weak. They do not have the stomach for the real world. They think playing by the rules gets you somewhere. It is pathetic." Logan flinched as if he had been struck physically. He stared at the speaker, his eyes wide and watery, his hands gripping the duvet cover until his knuckles turned white. He was hearing the people he called family, the people he had spent holidays with, strip him bare and mock his existence. Then Rachel's voice cut through the noise. It was clearer, likely, because she was standing closer to the open window where I had planted the bug. "Dad, stop worrying about Gus," she said, her tone dripping with boredom. "He cannot do anything. Logan won't let him. I have Logan wrapped around my little finger. I told him I needed space to think because of his mental state, and he apologized to me. He actually apologized for being homeless. Can you believe it? Carter asked the question that mattered, the one I had been waiting for. What about the money, Rachel? Is it secure? Is it all in the offshore trust like we discussed? There was a pause, a silence that felt heavy even over the radio waves. Then Rachel laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that I knew would haunt my son for the rest of his life. Offshore trust. Dad, come on. There is no trust. I spent the last of the startup capital at the Mohegan Sun Casino 3 weeks ago. I was chasing a loss on the roulette table. And the rest. Well, look at my closet. Those Louboutins didn't buy themselves. And neither did this ring. Logan stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. The tax optimization strategy, the legal shielding, the future of his company. It was all a lie to cover up a gambling addiction and a lust for luxury. But she wasn't done. But what if he asks for the statements? Victoria asked, her voice shrill with worry. Rachel snorted. Let him ask. He thinks the money is locked up for 5 years. That stupid cash cow believes anything I tell him, as long as I smile when I say it. He is an idiot, Mom. A useful, gullible idiot who served his purpose. That was the breaking point. Logan scrambled off the bed, his hand clamped over his mouth. He barely made it to the bathroom before I heard the violent sound of retching. He threw up until there was nothing left, his body physically rejecting the toxicity of the last 5 years. I did not go to him. I let him have his dignity. I sat there listening to the static return, staring at the little red light. My hand moved to my notebook. I wrote down the time. I wrote down the confession. Rachel Sinclair had just admitted to grand larceny and fraud on tape. She thought she was bragging to her parents. She didn't know she was reading her own indictment. The knock on the hotel door came at 8 in the morning. It was not the rhythmic tap of housekeeping or the hesitant knock of a delivery driver. It was 3 hard, authoritative raps. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit holding a thick manila envelope. I knew exactly what he was. He was a process server. I opened the door. He looked past me to Logan, who was pouring cereal for the twins. Logan Mercer, the man asked. My son nodded, confused. You have been served, the man said, thrusting the envelope into Logan's chest before turning and walking away without another word. Logan opened the envelope with trembling hands. As he read the first page, his knees gave out. He collapsed onto the sofa, the papers scattering across the coffee table. It was a divorce petition citing irreconcilable differences, which was expected. But underneath that was a motion for an emergency ex parte order. Rachel was requesting sole physical and legal custody of Leo and Sam. She was asking for a temporary restraining order, requiring Logan to stay 500 yards away from her and the children immediately. But the document that made my blood boil was the third one. It was a court order for an involuntary emergency psychiatric evaluation. The affidavit claimed that Logan Mercer had exhibited violent paranoid behavior, had threatened self-harm, and posed an imminent danger to his family. It stated that if he did not report to a state-designated facility within 24 hours, a bench warrant would be issued for his arrest. Logan looked up at me, his face a mask of pure terror. Dad, they are going to lock me up. They are going to take the boys and put me in a psych ward. If I get labeled mentally unstable, I will never get custody. I will never get a job. My life is over. I picked up the affidavit. I read the sworn statement. It was a work of fiction detailing incidents that never happened, threats that were never made. But it was signed by a licensed medical professional, a Dr. Theodore Phipps. That signature was the weapon they were using to execute my son. It was the nuclear option. They weren't just trying to win a divorce. They were trying to erase him. I looked at the name again. Phipps. I did not know him, but I knew his type. In my career, I had seen doctors sign off on disability fraud insurance scams and fake injury claims. They always had one thing in common. They were desperate. I handed the paper back to Logan. "Do not panic," I said, my voice calm and steady. "This piece of paper is not a death sentence. It is a map. It tells us exactly who we need to destroy next." I picked up my phone and called O'Malley. I gave him the name. "Dr. Theodore Phipps. I need everything, Mike. Malpractice suits, gambling debts, divorce settlements. Find me the pressure point." Then I sat down at the small desk in the hotel room and pulled out the stack of bank statements we had liberated from Mr. Henderson's office. I had a hunch. If Rachel and her parents were as arrogant as they seemed, they would have been lazy with their accounting. An hour later, O'Malley sent a dossier to my email. Dr. Phipps was a psychiatrist with a suspended license in 2 other states. He had 3 pending malpractice lawsuits and a lien on his house from the IRS. He was drowning in debt. He was a man for sale. I turned back to the bank statements, scanning the transaction list from the last week. I was looking for a specific amount. A bribe for a doctor isn't cheap, but for a family like the Sinclairs, who were cash poor and relying on stolen funds, it would be a specific round number. I found it on page 4. A transfer made 2 days ago via a mobile payment app. $5,000 sent to T. Phipps Medical Services. I called Logan over. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the line item. "Your wife paid Dr. Phipps $5,000 on Tuesday. That was the same day she kicked you out." Logan stared at the paper. "She paid him to say I am crazy." "She bribed him," I corrected. "This is not a medical diagnosis, son. This is a transaction. She bought a professional opinion to weaponize the court system against you. That affidavit is perjury, and this bank transfer is the smoking gun." I stood up and paced the room. The plan was forming in my head, sharp and dangerous. They wanted a psychiatric evaluation. Fine. We would give them one. But we wouldn't be playing by their rules. We were going to take Dr. Phipps and turn him into our star witness. "Get dressed." "Logan," I said. "We are going to pay the good doctor a visit. And we are going to remind him that the Hippocratic Oath says do no harm, but federal prison says do not take bribes." I sat at the small hotel desk, the threatening court order spread out before me like a declaration of war. My son was pacing the room, the terror of losing his children radiating off him in waves. He saw a medical professional's signature and saw authority. I saw it and smelled a rat. Honest doctors do not sign emergency psychiatric holds for men they have never met, based solely on the word of a wife who just emptied the joint bank account. My phone buzzed. It was O'Malley. "Check your secure email." "Gus," he growled, "you are going to like this." I opened the laptop I had bought earlier that morning. The dossier on Dr. Theodore Phipps downloaded in seconds. It was a catalog of professional failure and moral bankruptcy. Phipps wasn't a respected psychiatrist. He was a hired gun for divorce lawyers who needed to play dirty. I read through the summary, my finger tracing the lines on the screen. 3 malpractice suits settled out of court short in the last 5 years. A suspension of his medical license in New Jersey for overprescribing opioids, which he conveniently left off his current practice website. But the real leverage was in his financials. O'Malley had dug deep. Phipps was drowning. He had a gambling problem that made Rachel's casino losses look like pocket change. He owed 6 figures to bookies in Atlantic City and was months behind on his alimony payments. "This is not a doctor, Logan," I said, turning the screen so he could see. "This is a desperate man looking for a lifeline. He does not care about your mental health. He cares about his kneecaps not getting broken by loan sharks." Logan looked at the mugshot-like photo of Phipps. "But Dad, the court won't know that. To a judge, he is an expert witness." I pulled the stack of bank statements closer. "The court will know what we tell them, son. But first we need to prove the connection. Desperate men do not work for free, and Rachel does not have friends who do favors. She has vendors. I flipped through the transaction history from the joint account, the one Henderson had printed for us. I was looking for a recent outflow, something processed right before the affidavit was signed. It wouldn't be a check. Checks leave too much of a trail. It would be a wire or a peer-to-peer transfer. There it was. 2 days ago. The same day she kicked you out. A digital transfer of $5,000 sent to an account labeled TPM Services. I cross-referenced the tax ID O'Malley had found for Phipps. It was a match. TPM. Theodore Phipps Medical. I circled the transaction so hard the pen tore through the paper. Look at this, I told Logan. Your wife didn't just lie to a doctor. She bought him. $5,000. That is the price tag she put on your freedom and your fatherhood. She used your own money to hire the hitman who is trying to take your children. Logan stared at the entry, his face hardening. The fear was evaporating, replaced by the same cold fury that was fueling me. She paid him $5,000 to say I am crazy, he whispered. That is not a medical fee, I said, standing up and grabbing my coat. That is a bribe. And in the eyes of the law, that makes Dr. Phipps a co-conspirator in fraud and kidnapping. I put the documents in my briefcase. We are not going to the hearing tomorrow to defend you, Logan. We are going to Dr. Phipps's office right now, and we are going to give him a choice. He can be the plaintiff's expert witness, or he can be the defendant in a federal racketeering case. Let's see how his diagnosis holds up when he is the one sweating under the light. The small round table in the hotel suite was buried under a blizzard of paperwork. Bank statements, the dossier on Dr. Phipps, and the terrifying court order for Logan's psychiatric evaluation lay scattered like debris from a crash. Logan was vibrating with anxiety, his eyes darting between the documents and the door as if he expected the police to burst in at any moment. We need a family law specialist, Logan stammered, his voice tight with panic. We need to file a counter-motion immediately. We need to get an injunction against the evaluation. If we explain to the judge that Phipps is compromised, maybe we can get a stay. O'Malley sat back in the armchair, chewing on an unlit cigar. He looked like a man who had seen everything twice and was impressed by none of it. We can do that, kid, he rumbled, his voice like gravel. But civil court is slow. It is a grinder. By the time we prove Phipps is dirty, Rachel will have temporary custody. You won't see your boys for 6 months. And the money. That will be long gone, washed through a dozen shell companies. I slammed my hand down on the table. The sharp crack made Logan jump. We are not going to civil court, I said, my voice hard and absolute. We are not going to play defense. Defense is for people who are guilty or weak. We are neither. I looked at my son, locking eyes with him. Logan, listen to me. If we fight them on their terms, custody hearings, divorce proceedings, restraining orders, we get dragged into the mud. They have the home field advantage. They have the lies. They have the social standing in this town. If we play their game, we lose. Then what do we do? Logan asked, his voice desperate. We attack, I said. We attack the one thing that motivates every breath they take, their greed. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. You think I spent 40 years just looking at tax returns for mom and pop shops? I didn't just audit small businesses. I worked joint task forces with the FBI. I built cases against cartels and massive Ponzi schemes. I put away men who thought they owned the government. I turned back to them. I still have friends in the bureau, people who owe me favors, big favors. But I cannot call them for a domestic dispute. I cannot call them for a stolen inheritance or a bad divorce. The FBI does not get out of bed for anything less than a federal felony. O'Malley grinned. It was a shark's grin. You want to federalize it? Exactly, I said. I need a crime that crosses state lines. I need wire fraud. I need money laundering on a scale that forces the Department of Justice to kick down their door. I need to catch them in the act of trying to steal millions, not just thousands. Logan looked confused. But they have already stolen everything we have. No, I said. They have stolen what you had. But Carter Sinclair is desperate. We heard it on the wire. He is drowning in debt. He needs cash to cover his tracks and impress his investors. And when a man is drowning, he will grab onto anything that looks like a lifeline, even if it is an anchor. I leaned over the table, lowering my voice. We are going to offer him the deal of a lifetime. We are going to dangle a bait so shiny, so lucrative that his arrogance won't let him check the hook. We are going to make him think he is about to become a millionaire. And when he reaches for it, we are going to let the FBI snap the handcuffs on him. Logan looked at me, a mixture of fear and awe in his eyes. But Dad, how? We don't have millions of dollars to bait him with. No, I said. But I know someone who can pretend he does. Carter is a con man, and the only way to beat a con man is to run a better con. O'Malley pulled the file on the riverfront project Carter was bragging about. It is time to go fishing. O'Malley tossed a thick, glossy binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the surface until it hit Logan's arm. The cover featured a rendering of a gleaming glass skyscraper, reflecting off a pristine blue river. Riverfront Estates, the gold-embossed letters proclaimed. Luxury living for the modern elite. It looked impressive. It looked professional. It looked like a multi-million-dollar opportunity. But in my line of work, the shinier the brochure, the dirtier the deal. I opened the binder and started flipping through the pages. Architectural drawings projected returns, environmental impact statements that looked like they had been copy-pasted from a Wikipedia article. I pulled out a topographic map O'Malley had slipped into the back pocket. I laid it over the glossy rendering. Look at this, Logan, I said, tapping the map. Carter is selling condos on the riverbank. But according to the Army Corps of Engineers survey from last year, this land isn't a riverbank. It is a flood basin. It is a swamp. You couldn't get a permit to build a lemonade stand on this dirt, let alone a 20-story tower. Logan stared at the map. But he has investors. He has been talking about this project for months. He said he put his own capital into it. He put your capital into it, I corrected. And he didn't buy the land. He bought an option on the land, a right to purchase. And look at the expiration date. I pointed to a line in the fine print of a contract O'Malley had dug up. The option expired in 7 days. If Carter didn't close on the land or bring in a primary investor with $5 million by next Saturday, the contract would void. He would lose everything he had put in. But that wasn't the worst part. O'Malley cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. It gets uglier, Gus. I ran Carter's name through some back channels. He didn't borrow the deposit money from a bank. No bank would touch this swamp. He went to private lenders, the kind that operate out of the back of pool halls in South Philly. My eyes narrowed. Hard money lenders. Loan sharks. He is into them for $300,000, O'Malley said. And the VIG is 20% a month. He is not just underwater, Gus. He is wearing cement shoes. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together. The theft of Logan's startup funds, the rush to get the divorce, the fake medical records, the desperation to seize control of my assets. Carter Sinclair wasn't just a greedy man living beyond his means. He was a terrified man running for his life. He needed cash flow immediately to keep the sharks at bay. He had stripped his daughter's husband clean just to make the interest payments. This is it, I said, looking up at my son. This is the tuhuyet, the fatal weakness. Carter is desperate. He needs a miracle. He needs a big, stupid investor with deep pockets to swoop in, buy into this fantasy project, and give him the cash to pay off the mob before they break his legs. Logan looked at the glossy brochure with disgust. He scammed me to pay a loan shark. He did, I said. And now we are going to use that desperation against him. He is hunting for a whale, a rich mark who won't ask too many questions about zoning laws or floodplains. So we are going to give him one. We are going to present him with the investor of his dreams, and by the time he realizes the check is fake, he will be in handcuffs. I turned to O'Malley. Mike, get your friend ready. We need a billionaire from Texas, and we need him by tomorrow morning. Carter Sinclair is about to get the deal of a lifetime. Lying to an honest man is a sin, but lying to a con artist is a public service. I sat at the hotel desk, my laptop open, building a ghost. We needed a billionaire, someone with more money than sense, the kind of investor Carter Sinclair dreamed about in his feverish, debt-ridden sleep. I logged into a secure server O'Malley had set up. Within an hour, we had birthed the Sterling Capital Group, a private equity firm based in Dallas, Texas. We gave it a website filled with stock photos of oil rigs, skyscrapers, and men shaking hands in boardrooms. It looked legitimate. It looked expensive. It looked like salvation. But a website is just a digital facade. We needed a face. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not used in a decade. Harlan Vance answered on the second ring. Harlan was a retired FBI undercover operative who had spent the 80s infiltrating the mob in New Jersey. He had retired to Florida to run a community theater group, but I knew he missed the thrill of the game. When I told him I needed him to play a loud, arrogant Texas oil tycoon looking to dump $5 million into a real estate project, he didn't even ask about the pay. He just asked what kind of boots he should wear. I need you in New York tonight, Harlan, I said. You are J.D. Sterling. You made your money in fracking, and now you want a trophy property in the Northeast. You are impatient. You are liquid, and you do not read the fine print. Harlan laughed, a deep, booming sound that was already in character. I will dust off my Stetson Gus. Who is the mark? I gave him the rundown on Carter. I told him about the desperation, the loan sharks, and the ego. Carter needs to believe he is the smartest man in the room, I explained. Let him talk. Let him brag. You just nod and talk about writing checks. Once Harlan was on a plane, I assumed my role. I could not meet Carter face to face yet. He would recognize me instantly. So I became Mr. Black, the efficient, faceless executive assistant to Mr. Sterling. I created a secure email address. I drafted the letter that would be the bait. I made sure the language was precise, using the kind of financial buzzwords that make men like Carter salivate. Subject: immediate capital allocation. Riverfront project. Dear Mr. Sinclair, I represent the Sterling Capital Group. We have been tracking the development of the riverfront estates with great interest. Mr. Sterling is looking to diversify his portfolio before the end of the fiscal quarter and has authorized an aggressive acquisition strategy for high-potential residential developments. We are prepared to offer a capital injection of $5 million for a majority equity stake pending an expedited due diligence process. Mr. Sterling is currently in the Northeast and would like to move to a contract signing immediately. We understand time is of the essence. Please confirm your availability for a preliminary discussion. Regards, A. Black, Senior Director of Acquisitions. I read the email to Logan. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, wringing his hands. Dad, $5 million. He is going to know it is fake. It is too good to be true. That is exactly why he will believe it. I said, my finger hovering over the enter key. Con men always believe they are due for a big score. He thinks he deserves this. He thinks the universe owes him a bailout because he is special. He won't see a trap. He will see a mirror reflecting his own greed. I hit send. The email whooshed away into the digital ether. I leaned back in my chair and looked at my watch. It was 4 p.m. Carter was probably sitting in his office staring at a calendar, counting down the days until the loan sharks came for his knees. I guessed it would take him less than 10 minutes to reply. I was wrong. It took him 3. My phone chimed with a notification. The reply from Carter Sinclair was frantic, riddled with typos, and desperate. Mr. Black. We are very interested. The riverfront project is shovel-ready and primed for explosion. I am available anytime. Please advise next steps. I showed the screen to Logan. We got him, son. He just swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. Now we just have to reel him in slowly until he is flopping on the deck. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start the show. The black receiver box on the hotel table crackled to life, the red light pulsing in time with the voices that filled the room. We were listening to the sound of salvation arriving at the Sinclair household, or at least what they thought was salvation. Carter's voice was so loud it distorted the speaker. He was screaming, not in anger, but in a frenzy of euphoria. "Victoria, get in here!" he shouted. "Look at this email! Look at the number! $5 million! Sterling Capital wants in! We are saved!" I told you I could pull this off. I heard the click of heels on hardwood floors, then the rustle of paper as Victoria grabbed the printed email. Her gasp was audible. "Oh my God, Carter. Is this real? Texas oil money. This is it. This pays off the lenders. This pays off the house. We are going to be rich. Real rich, not just credit card rich." They were celebrating. They were popping corks. They were already spending the money I hadn't even given them yet. It was sickening to listen to. They didn't care about the project. They didn't care about building anything. They just cared about the cash injection that would keep their house of cards from collapsing. But then the celebration turned dark. The clinking of glasses stopped. Victoria's voice dropped sharp and calculating. "Carter, wait. What about Logan? His name is still on the original incorporation papers for the shell company. If he finds out we are selling equity, he could sue. He could freeze the assets. He could ruin everything." Carter scoffed. "He is sleeping in his car, Victoria. He doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer who can spell lawsuit. But you are right. We cannot take chances. We need him gone. Completely. Legally erased." I heard the beep of a phone dialing. A moment later, Rachel's voice came through the speakerphone. "Dad, what is it? I am trying to sell Logan's laptop online." "Rachel, listen to me." Carter commanded, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "Forget the laptop. We just landed a whale. The riverfront project is going to close. $5 million. But we need a clear path. You need to finalize the restraining order against Logan immediately." I saw my son flinch. He looked at the speaker, his eyes filled with a pain that went deeper than bankruptcy. "What do you mean?" Rachel asked. "I mean you need to make sure he cannot come within a mile of us," Carter hissed. "Tell the judge he threatened to burn the house down. Tell them he has a gun. I don't care what you say, just make it stick. If he shows up claiming he owns a piece of this company, he scares off the investor. We need him in a facility or in a cell by Saturday. Do you understand?" There was a silence on the line. Then Rachel spoke, her voice cold and devoid of any empathy for the father of her children. "I understand, Dad. Don't worry. I have Dr. Phipps working on the evaluation. By the time your investor signs the check, Logan will be in a padded room wearing a jacket that ties in the back. We will be free of him." Free of him. She said it like he was a tumor she was cutting out, not the man she had promised to love. "Okay," Carter said. "Good girl. We are about to be very, very wealthy. Get it done." The line clicked dead. The room in the hotel was silent, save for the hum of the heater. Logan looked at me. He wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried up, replaced by a hard, hollow look. "They are going to frame me, Dad. They are going to ruin my life just to close a deal." I reached over and turned off the volume on the receiver. The red light faded to black. "No," I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. "They are not going to ruin you. They just gave us everything we need. They admitted to conspiracy. They admitted to perjury. And they just admitted that the psychiatric evaluation is a fraud designed to facilitate a financial crime. I walked to the window. The city lights were blurring in the snow. They think they are clearing the path for a payday, I said. But they are just clearing the path for their own destruction. They took the bait, Logan. They are hungry. They are desperate. And now they are careless. I turned back to him. Get some sleep. Tomorrow my friend Harlan arrives from Texas. We have a golf game to play. It is time to pull the net. And trust me, son, when we are done, the only thing Carter Sinclair will be wearing is an orange jumpsuit. The country club was a fortress of exclusivity, a place where the grass was manicured with scissors and the air smelled of old money and pine needles. It was freezing, the kind of cold that bites through wool, but business does not stop for winter. Harlan Vance, my old friend and former undercover operative, strode onto the first tee, looking every inch the Texas billionaire. He wore a shearling coat, a Stetson hat that cost more than a Honda Civic, and he carried himself with the loud, unapologetic swagger of a man who owns oil wells. I stood 3 paces behind him, dressed in a nondescript black overcoat and dark aviator sunglasses. I held a leather portfolio against my chest. To the world, I was Mr. Black, the silent, efficient executive assistant. In reality, I was a walking surveillance unit. The portfolio concealed a high-fidelity recorder, and my sunglasses hid the fact that I was staring daggers at the man approaching us. Carter Sinclair walked up the path, his golf bag slung over the shoulder of a shivering caddy. He was trying too hard. His outfit was brand new, likely put on a credit card he couldn't pay off. He was smiling, but his eyes were darting around nervously. He shook Harlan's hand with a grip that was sweaty despite the cold. Mr. Sterling Carter beamed, his voice too loud. It is an honor. Welcome to New York. I took the liberty of booking the back 9 just for us. No interruptions. Harlan laughed, a deep, booming sound. I appreciate that, Sinclair. I like privacy. And I like doing business fast. My time is worth $5,000 a minute, so let's hope your swing is as good as your pitch deck. They played. I walked behind them, silent as a shadow. For 2 hours, I listened to Carter Sinclair dig his own grave with his mouth. He was so eager to impress the billionaire that he abandoned all caution. When Harlan asked about the zoning permits for the riverfront project, Carter lied. He said they were fully approved. I recorded it. When Harlan asked about existing liens on the property, Carter laughed and said he owned the land free and clear. I recorded it. Every lie was a federal offense. Every misrepresentation was wire fraud. But the real test of my restraint came on the 7th hole. Harlan was lining up a putt. He looked at Carter and asked casually about his family. I hear you run a family business, Sinclair. I respect that. I keep my circle small, too. Carter leaned on his putter, looking smug. I do, Mr. Sterling. But you know how it is. Sometimes family can be a liability. I recently had to do some restructuring. Harlan raised an eyebrow. Restructuring. Carter nodded, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret between titans of industry. I had a son-in-law. Nice enough boy, but weak. No vision. He was a drain on resources. Mentally unstable, if I am being honest. He was holding us back, dragging down the company morale. I had to make the hard call. I cut him loose last week. Kicked him to the curb to protect the bottom line. Sometimes you have to trim the dead weight to let the eagle fly. My hand gripped the leather portfolio so hard the leather creaked. I felt a surge of violence so pure it frightened me. I wanted to drop the act. I wanted to grab a 9-iron and wrap it around his neck. I wanted to scream that the dead weight he was talking about was the only reason he had a roof over his head. I wanted to tell him that my son was 10 times the man he would ever be. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stared at the back of Carter's head behind my dark glasses and forced myself to breathe. This was not a street fight. This was an execution. And an execution requires patience. Harlan must have sensed my tension because he quickly sank his putt and clapped Carter on the back. "Ruthless," he said. "I like that in a partner. Business comes first." Carter beamed, thinking he had just bonded with a kindred spirit. He had no idea that the man he called dead weight was currently sitting in a hotel room helping me tighten the noose that would snap Carter's neck. I checked the recorder. The light was green. We had him. We sat in the leather-bound booth of the clubhouse, the smell of cigar smoke and old whiskey hanging in the air. Harlan leaned back, looking like the king of Texas, and dropped the offer on the table like a winning poker hand. "I like you, Sinclair," he boomed, his voice carrying across the room. "You have the killer instinct. Sterling Capital is in. $5 million for the riverfront project." Carter looked like he was going to faint from joy. He reached for the bottle of scotch, his hands trembling. "This is fantastic news, Mr. Sterling. You won't regret this. We can have the papers drawn up by Monday." Harlan held up a hand, stopping him cold. "Monday is for accountants, Sinclair. I am a showman. I hear you are hosting a charity gala this Saturday night. That is where we sign. On stage, under the lights. I want the press there. I want the world to see that Sterling Capital is revitalizing this city." Carter swallowed hard. "Saturday. That was only 3 days away." "That would be perfect," he stammered. "A real statement piece." "Exactly," Harlan said. "But there is one standard condition. My board of directors is strict about compliance. Before we release a sum of this magnitude, we require a reciprocal due diligence fee, $200,000, wired to our escrow account by tomorrow noon. It is fully refundable upon closing, of course. It is just a good faith deposit to prove your liquidity and ensure there are no liens on your accounts." I watched Carter from behind my dark glasses. I saw the blood drain from his face. He didn't have $200,000. He was drowning in debt to loan sharks. But he was staring at a $5 million lifeline. His greed was fighting a war with his reality. Of course, Carter lied, his voice cracking slightly. "Standard procedure. The funds will be wired first thing in the morning." We left him there, sweating in his expensive suit. As soon as we got back to the car, I pulled out the receiver. We needed to hear the aftermath. The drive back to the hotel was silent until the receiver crackled to life. We were listening to a man unraveling. Carter was back at the house and he was screaming. "I need liquid assets, Rachel. We need $200,000 by tomorrow or the deal dies." "But Daddy, that is impossible." Rachel's voice whined. "We spent the cash." "Then sell the jewelry," Carter roared. The sound of something shattering against a wall made Logan jump. "Sell the bracelets, sell the necklace, and give me that ring." "No, not the ring," Rachel shrieked. "It is brand new. I need it for the gala. I need to look the part." "There is no gala if we do not get this money," Carter shouted. "You stupid girl. Do you think I care about your vanity? Give me the ring. And max out every credit card you have. Take cash advances. Drain the emergency limits. I don't care if you have to sell the furniture. Get me that money." Logan sat in the passenger seat staring at the black box. He was listening to his wife, the woman who had tormented him for being poor, being stripped of her trophies by her own father. It was a cannibalistic feeding frenzy. They were eating each other to feed the lie. "She stole my money to buy that ring," Logan whispered. "And now he is forcing her to sell it to pay us." "It is poetic justice, son," I said, turning the car onto the highway. "They are liquidating their lives to buy a ticket on a sinking ship. And on Saturday night, we are going to be the ones who pull the plug." We sat in the leather-bound booth of the clubhouse, the smell of cigar smoke and old whiskey hanging in the air. Harlan leaned back, looking like the king of Texas, and dropped the offer on the table like a winning poker hand. "I like you, Sinclair," he boomed, his voice carrying across the room. "You have the killer instinct. Sterling Capital is in. $5 million for the riverfront project." Carter looked like he was going to faint from joy. He reached for the bottle of scotch, his hands trembling. "This is fantastic news, Mr. Sterling. You won't regret this. We can have the papers drawn up by Monday." Harlan held up a hand, stopping him cold. "Monday is for accountants, Sinclair. I am a showman. I hear you are hosting a charity gala this Saturday night. That is where we sign. On stage. Under the lights. I want the press there. I want the world to see that Sterling Capital is revitalizing this city." Carter swallowed hard. Saturday. That was only 3 days away. "That would be perfect," he stammered. "A real statement piece." "Exactly," Harlan said. "But there is one standard condition. My board of directors is strict about compliance. Before we release a sum of this magnitude, we require a reciprocal due diligence fee, $200,000, wired to our escrow account by tomorrow noon. It is fully refundable upon closing, of course. It is just a good faith deposit to prove your liquidity and ensure there are no liens on your accounts." I watched Carter from behind my dark glasses. I saw the blood drain from his face. He didn't have $200,000. He was drowning in debt to loan sharks, but he was staring at a $5 million lifeline. His greed was fighting a war with his reality. Of course, Carter lied, his voice cracking slightly. "Standard procedure. The funds will be wired first thing in the morning." We left him there, sweating in his expensive suit. As soon as we got back to the car, I pulled out the receiver. We needed to hear the aftermath. The drive back to the hotel was silent until the receiver crackled to life. We were listening to a man unraveling. Carter was back at the house and he was screaming, "I need liquid assets, Rachel. We need $200,000 by tomorrow or the deal dies." "But Daddy, that is impossible," Rachel's voice whined. "We spent the cash." "Then sell the jewelry," Carter roared. The sound of something shattering against a wall made Logan jump. "Sell the bracelets, sell the necklace, and give me that ring." "No, not the ring," Rachel shrieked. "It is brand new. I need it for the gala. I need to look the part." "There is no gala if we do not get this money," Carter shouted. "You stupid girl. Do you think I care about your vanity? Give me the ring, and max out every credit card you have. Take cash advances, drain the emergency limits. I don't care if you have to sell the furniture. Get me that money." Logan sat in the passenger seat staring at the black box. He was listening to his wife, the woman who had tormented him for being poor, being stripped of her trophies by her own father. It was a cannibalistic feeding frenzy. They were eating each other to feed the lie. "She stole my money to buy that ring," Logan whispered. "And now he is forcing her to sell it to pay us." "It is poetic justice, son," I said, turning the car onto the highway. "They are liquidating their lives to buy a ticket on a sinking ship. And on Saturday night, we are going to be the ones who pull the plug." The phone buzzed on the hotel nightstand at 10 o'clock that night. It was a harsh, vibrating sound that cut through the quiet room where we were eating takeout. Logan looked at the screen and his jaw tightened. It was Rachel. For the last 3 days, she had only communicated through threats and lawyers. Now suddenly, she was calling. I nodded at him. "Answer it," I whispered, "but put it on speaker." Logan picked up the phone. His hand was steady this time. He pressed the speaker button and laid the device on the table between us. "Hello, Rachel," he said. His voice was calm, devoid of the fear that used to define his interactions with her. "Logan, honey, is that you?" Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the screaming harpy from the recordings. It was soft dripping with a sugary synthetic sweetness that made my skin crawl. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. "I have been thinking, Logan. All this fighting, it is not good for us. It is not good for the boys. I miss you." Logan looked at me, his eyes widening in disbelief. She was pivoting. She was desperate for cash to pay Carter's entry fee for the scam we had set up, and she was trying to manipulate him into a quick settlement. "What do you want, Rachel?" Logan asked. I just want peace, she sighed. I want to offer you a deal. I know you are struggling out there. I know you have no money. So I scraped together some cash. I can give you $10,000, Logan. Cash. Tonight. $10,000. It was an insult. It was a fraction of what she had stolen. And what do I have to do for this generosity? Logan asked. Just sign the papers, honey. Sign the waiver on the house and the full custody agreement. If you do that, I will give you the $10,000, and I will even let you see the boys. Once a month. Supervised, of course. But it is a start, right? We can be a family again in a way. I watched my son. A week ago he might have taken it. He might have been so broken, so desperate to see his children, that he would have signed his life away for crumbs. But the man sitting across from me now knew the truth. He knew she was lying. He knew she needed him to sign so she could mortgage the house to the hilt to pay the loan sharks. Logan took a deep breath. He didn't look at me for reassurance. He didn't need it anymore. He looked at the phone with pure disgust. Rachel, stop, he said. There was a silence on the line. Then nervously, What do you mean, sweetie? I am trying to help you. You are not trying to help me, Logan said, his voice dropping to a low, cold timbre that sounded exactly like mine. You are broke. You spent the startup capital. You spent the savings. And now you are trying to buy me off with pocket change because you need to liquidate the house for your father's new scheme. The sweetness on the other end evaporated instantly. The silence stretched heavy and dangerous. I don't want your $10,000. Rachel Logan continued, leaning closer to the phone. In fact, you should keep it. Put it in a very safe place. Why? She snapped, her voice sharpening back into the dagger we knew. Because where you are going to need every penny for the canteen fund, Logan said. The explosion was immediate. You ungrateful little worm, Rachel screamed, the volume so loud it distorted the speaker. I offer you a lifeline, and you spit in my face. You are nothing. You are homeless trash. I will destroy you. I will make sure you never see those kids again. Logan didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He reached out and tapped the red button ending the call. The silence that followed was beautiful. He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who just realized the chains were made of paper. She is scared, Dad, he said. Yes, I replied, pouring him a fresh glass of water. She is terrified. And terrified to people make mistakes. We just forced her hand. Now watch them burn. The deadline was noon. That was the time Harlan Vance, playing the role of the impatient billionaire J.D. Sterling, had set for the wire transfer. At 9 in the morning, the GPS tracker on Carter Sinclair's Mercedes pinged on our laptop screen. He was moving fast, but he was not heading to a commercial bank. Banks ask questions. Banks want to see tax returns and income statements. Carter was heading south into the industrial district to a nondescript brick building that O'Malley told me was a front for a hard money lending operation run by the Russo family. We watched the digital dot move on the screen in the hotel room. Logan was pacing, wiping sweat from his forehead. Dad, if he borrows money from people like that, isn't that dangerous? If the deal falls through, they won't sue him. They will hurt him. I shook my head, keeping my eyes on the screen. It is dangerous for him, Logan. We are just the observers. He made the choice to walk through that door. Through the long-range microphone O'Malley had planted in Carter's car earlier that morning, we heard the aftermath of the meeting as he got back into his vehicle. But before that, O'Malley had tapped into the audio feed inside the lender's office using a directional laser microphone aimed at the window. The audio was grainy, but the desperation was clear as a bell. I need 200,000, Carter's voice had pleaded. Immediate wire. I can pay you back double on Monday. I have a deal closing. $5 million is coming in. The voice on the other end was low and sounded like grinding stones. I don't care about your deal, Sinclair. You are already deep. What do you have for me? There was a rustling of papers. The deed to the house on Elm Street, Carter said. It is valued at $800,000. It is free and clear. Take it as collateral. Logan froze in the hotel room. That is my house, he whispered, his face draining of color. That is where Leo and Sam sleep. He is leveraging the house where his own grandchildren live. I put a hand on his arm to keep him grounded. We listened. The lender laughed, a dry, humorless sound. This is your daughter's house, Sinclair. You are putting your grandkids on the street if you miss this payment. The VIG is 20% a week. I won't miss it, Carter snapped. Just give me the money. I watched the transaction unfold in my mind. Carter Sinclair, the man who pretended to be a pillar of high society, was signing a predatory high-interest mortgage with a loan shark using his daughter's home as security. He was literally selling the roof over his family's head to fund a gambling bet on a fake real estate project. He was so blinded by the promise of the $5 million from Sterling Capital that he didn't see the cliff he was driving off. He did it, I said, watching the GPS dot start moving again. He signed the papers. He is heading to his bank to wire the funds to our escrow account. Logan sank into the chair, putting his head in his hands. He is a monster. He doesn't care about Rachel. He doesn't care about the boys. He would sell them all for a check. He is not just a monster, Logan, I said, closing the laptop. He is a dead man walking. He thinks he is buying a ticket to the big leagues. But what he's actually doing is creating a paper trail that links him directly to organized crime proceeds. When we drop the hammer tomorrow night, he won't just owe us an apology. He will owe the mob $200,000 he doesn't have. And he will have the FBI asking why he is laundering loan shark money through a fake investment deal. I stood up and poured 2 coffees. Drink up, son. The money is on its way. They have officially dug their own graves. Now we just have to wait for them to fall in. I walked into the precinct shortly after dusk. It smelled of stale coffee floor wax and the heavy metallic scent of justice waiting to be served. I wasn't there to file a report. I was there to deliver a conviction on a silver platter. I bypassed the front desk and walked straight to the corner office of Chief Marcus Miller. We had worked together 20 years ago on a pension fund embezzlement case that took down a corrupt union boss. Marcus knew that when I knocked on his door, I didn't bring problems. I brought solutions. He looked up from his paperwork, his eyes narrowing, then widening in recognition. Gus Mercer, he grunted, standing up to shake my hand. You look like you haven't aged a day, you old bloodhound. What brings you out of retirement? I placed a thick black binder on his desk. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. I am here to report a crime in progress, Marcus. Multi-count wire fraud, money laundering, extortion, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. And the best part is the perpetrators are throwing a party to celebrate it on Saturday night. Marcus opened the binder. O'Malley and I had spent the afternoon organizing the evidence. It was a forensic masterpiece. Tab A showed the structuring of Logan's stolen funds into the shell company. Tab B showed the bribe paid to Dr. Phipps. Tab C contained the transcripts of the wiretaps where Carter and Rachel discussed liquidating assets to hide them from the divorce court. But it was Tab D that made Marcus sit up straight. It was the digital trace of the wire transfer Carter had sent that morning. $200,000 originating from a known front for the Russo crime family, moving into an escrow account for a fraudulent investment deal. He is washing loan shark money, Marcus whispered, tracing the line with his finger. This guy isn't just a white-collar thief. He is moving dirty cash for the mob. He thinks he is paying an entry fee for a $5 million investment, I explained. He is desperate. He borrowed from the sharks to pay the fee, hoping the big investment would pay them back. He is trying to cycle dirty money into a clean real estate project to hide the origin. That is classic money laundering. Marcus reached for his phone. I can have a warrant signed in an hour. We can pick him up at his house tonight." I reached out and covered his hand. "No, Marcus. Not tonight." He looked at me confused. "Why wait?" "He is a flight risk." "Because tonight it is just a messy financial case," I said, leaning in. "His lawyers will argue it was a misunderstanding, a bad loan, a clerical error. They will tie you up in court for years. But on Saturday night, at the Gala, Carter is going to stand on a stage. He is going to sign a contract with Sterling Capital. He is going to publicly declare his ownership of a fraudulent project and accept what he thinks is $5 million. I paused to let the weight of it sink in. The moment his pen hits that paper, the intent is cemented. It becomes attempted grand larceny of $5 million. It becomes irrefutable. And I want him to do it in front of 300 witnesses. I want the handcuffs to go on while the flashbulbs are popping. I want there to be absolutely nowhere for him to hide." Marcus looked at the binder, then at me. He smiled a slow, grim expression. "You always were a dramatic son of a bitch, Gus." "It is not drama, Marcus. It is distinct clarity. I want a squad car around the corner of the hotel at 8 p.m. I want plainclothes officers in the ballroom. When I give the signal, you take them down. All of them. Carter, Victoria, Rachel. And pick up the doctor, too." Marcus nodded. "Consider it done. We will be there." I walked out of the station into the cold night air. The trap was set. The cage was built. The bait had been taken. All that was left now was to wait for the animal to walk in and close the door behind him. The hotel room was quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside and the hurricane we were about to unleash tomorrow. Leo and Sam were sitting on the beige carpet surrounded by a scattering of crayons and coloring books. They were drawing houses. Big lopsided squares with triangular roofs and yellow suns. It broke my heart to see it. They were drawing what they missed. They were drawing the safety that had been stolen from them by their own mother and grandparents. I sat down on the floor next to them, my old joints popping with the effort. Sam looked up, his big blue eyes filled with a confusion no 5-year-old should ever have to feel. "Grandpa, are we going to stay in the hotel forever?" he asked, his voice small. "I miss my room. I miss my Lego set. I want to go home." I reached out and smoothed his hair back. The anger I felt toward the Sinclairs was a fire in my gut. But for these boys, I had to be soft. I had to be the rock, no Sammy. I whispered, making sure my voice was steady. "You are not staying here forever. Tomorrow night, your dad and I are going to fix everything. We are going to get your house back. I promise you. No one is ever going to lock you out in the cold again." The bathroom door opened and Logan stepped out. I looked up and for a second I didn't recognize him. The shivering, broken man I had found sleeping in a freezing car 3 days ago was gone. In his place stood a man wearing the charcoal gray suit I had bought him. The jacket fit his broad shoulders perfectly. The crisp white shirt was starched and bright against his skin. He had shaved and his hair was combed back. He stood taller. The slump in his posture, the physical manifestation of 5 years of emotional abuse, had vanished. He walked over to the full-length mirror in the hallway and stared at his reflection. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked, turning slightly from side to side, adjusting his cufflinks. It was as if he was meeting himself for the first time in years. Rachel had spent their entire marriage telling him he was sloppy, that he was socially awkward, that he was lucky she even looked at him. She had projected her own insecurities onto him until he believed them. But tonight, the mirror told a different story. "I forgot what I looked like, Dad," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the glass. "She made me feel so small, like I was a child she had to tolerate. But looking at this, I do not look crazy. I do not look unstable. I look like the man I was before I met her." I stood up and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You look like a man who is done being a victim, Logan. You look like a father who is about to fight for his sons." Logan turned to face me. The terror that had been haunting his eyes for days was gone. It was replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. "I am ready, Dad," he said. "I am ready to face her. I used to be terrified of her yelling of her judgment. But now that I know it is all a con, I am not scared. I just feel focused. I want to look her in the eye when the truth comes out. I want to see her face when she realizes she didn't break me." I nodded. The transformation was complete. We weren't just bringing a lawsuit to the gala. We were bringing a reckoning. "Get some sleep, son," I said. "Tomorrow is the big night, and we are going to be the guests of honor." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and sequins vibrating with the low hum of expensive conversation and clinking champagne flutes. It was the kind of room where people came to see and be seen, where net worth was worn on the wrist and around the neck. From the shadows of the entrance hall, I watched the Sinclair family holding court in the center of the room. They looked like royalty. Carter was wearing a tuxedo that strained slightly at the buttons, a glass of scotch in his hand, laughing loudly at a joke made by the city councilman. He was radiating the manic energy of a man who thinks he has just pulled off the heist of the century. Beside him, Victoria was draped in emerald silk, smiling tight and sharp at the wives of the investors she had helped defraud. And then there was Rachel. She was wearing a floor-length red gown that screamed for attention. She looked stunning, but to my trained eye, the cracks were visible. I focused on the necklace resting against her collarbone. It was a glittering cascade of stones that looked like diamonds from a distance. But under the chandelier light, they lacked the fire of the real thing. They were high-grade cubic zirconia. She had pawned the real heirloom necklace this morning, just as Carter had demanded replacing it with a replica to keep up appearances. It was a pathetic, desperate masquerade. Carter raised his glass, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Tonight marks a new era," he boasted to a circle of bankers. "My partnership with Sterling Capital is not just an investment. It is a validation of everything we have built. We are bringing the Riverfront project to life." I felt Logan stiffen beside me. He heard the lie. He saw his wife wearing fake jewels paid for with his stolen future. But he didn't retreat. He adjusted his cuffs, took a deep breath, and stepped into the light. We walked toward the double mahogany doors. A mountain of a man in a black security suit stepped in front of us, his face impassive. He looked Logan up and down. "I am sorry, gentlemen," he rumbled, his voice deep and barring. "This is a private event. Invitation only." I saw Rachel turn her head at the commotion. Her eyes locked onto Logan, and for a second, her face went blank with shock. She had expected him to be in a holding cell or shivering in a parking lot. She hadn't expected him to be standing there in a $2,000 suit looking like a CEO. She tapped her father on the shoulder and whispered something frantic. Carter spun around, his face flushing red. He started making a slashing motion across his throat to the security guard, mouthing the words, "Throw them out." The guard took a step toward us, his hand reaching for his radio. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately, or I will be forced to remove you. The owners have indicated you are not on the guest list." I didn't flinch. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. It was the VIP invitation Carter had messengered to the offices of Sterling Capital just yesterday, intended for J.D. Sterling's senior associates. I handed it to the guard. "I think you will find our credentials are in order," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "We are the guests of honor. We are representing the investors." The guard opened the envelope. He saw the gold foil stamp. He saw the VIP designation that granted all access. He looked from the ticket to Carter, who was fuming, but helpless to stop a scene without alerting the other guests, and back to me. His demeanor changed instantly. He stepped back and unhooked the velvet rope. "My apologies, sir," he said, bowing his head slightly. "Right this way." Your table is near the stage. I looked at Logan. He held his head high. We walked past the guard straight into the lion's den. Carter Sinclair watched us come, and for the first time all night, the glass of scotch in his hand was trembling. The show was about to begin. The spotlight hit center stage, turning Carter Sinclair into a glowing figure of success. He adjusted the microphone stand, his smile stretching so wide it looked painful. He was basking in the applause, intoxicated by the promise of the $5 million he thought was about to land in his account. He believed he had won. He believed the check was already printed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter announced, his voice booming through the speakers with a false grandeur. "Tonight is not just a celebration. It is a partnership. It is the beginning of a legacy. Please welcome to the stage the man who is making the future of our riverfront possible, the CEO of Sterling Capital, Mr. J.D. Sterling." The spotlight swept across the room, searching for the cowboy hat of my friend Harlan. The band prepared to play a fanfare, but Harlan didn't move. He sat at his table, crossed his arms over his chest, and tipped his hat at me. Instead of the billionaire from Texas, I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor seemed to echo in the sudden hush. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my tie. And I began the long, slow walk to the podium. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I heard whispers. "Who is that? Is that the grandfather? Why is he walking up there?" I saw Rachel at the front table. Her face was a mask of confusion that was rapidly crumbling into panic. She grabbed her mother's arm, her fingernails digging into the silk. I climbed the stairs, one by one. Carter stared at me, his eyes bulging. He stepped back from the podium, covering the microphone with his hand. "Gus, get the hell out of here," he hissed, spit flying from his lips. "You are ruining everything. Where is Sterling? What are you doing?" I didn't answer him. I reached out and took the microphone from his sweating hand. He was too stunned to fight me. I turned to the audience. The blinding lights made it hard to see faces, but I knew they were watching. I knew the investors were watching, and I knew the police were waiting in the wings. "I am afraid Mr. Sterling could not make it up these stairs," I said, my voice calm and amplified to every corner of the ballroom. "Because Mr. Sterling does not exist. I am here to represent the only real investor in this room. The truth." Carter lunged for the mic, his face purple with rage. But Logan stepped up from the side of the stage, blocking him with a broad chest. My son stood like a wall, staring down the man who had tormented him for years. I pulled a small remote from my pocket and pointed it at the massive LED screen behind us that had been displaying the riverfront logo. I pressed the button. The logo vanished. In its place, a high-definition image of a bank statement appeared. It was magnified 10 feet tall. The red circles I had drawn were glowing like neon signs. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The numbers were undeniable. The $50,000 transfer to the car dealership. The $12,000 to Hermes. But I wasn't done. I pressed the button again. The screen flickered to video footage. It was grainy black and white, shot from a long-range lens just yesterday. It showed Carter sitting in his car, handing a property deed to a man with a neck tattoo. The audio played over the speakers loud and clear, silencing the room. "Take the house," Carter's recorded voice boomed. "Just give me the cash. I don't care about my daughter. I don't care if they end up on the street. Just give me the money." Carter froze. He looked at the screen, then at the crowd, then at me. He looked like a man watching his own execution. The silence was absolute. The party was over. The audit was public. The room was dead silent, the only light coming from the massive screen broadcasting the autopsy of a crime. I kept the microphone raised, my voice steady as a judge delivering a verdict. I turned to look at Carter, who was shaking so hard the ice in his glass would have been rattling if he hadn't dropped it moments ago. I pointed to the line item on the screen that showed the massive withdrawal. $150,000, I said, letting the number hang in the air. That was the money I gave my son to build a future. That was the money for his children. And what did you do with it, Carter? Did you build a building? Did you break ground on this riverfront paradise? I pointed a finger directly at his wrist. No. You used it to buy that watch. You stole my retirement to buy a prop for your costume. Is it even real, Carter? Or is it a fake, just like this company, just like this party, and just like you? That was the spark that blew the powder keg. Rachel snapped. The facade of the cool, collected socialite dropped, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. She let out a shriek of pure rage and hiked up her expensive red gown, charging up the stairs in her heels. Her eyes were fixed on the microphone in my hand. She was coming to tear it away, to scratch, to scream, to do anything to stop the humiliation that was being beamed into the eyes of every donor in the room. I didn't move. I didn't have to. A figure in a charcoal gray suit stepped out of the shadows and planted himself firmly between us. Logan. He stood like a statue, broad and immovable. As Rachel reached out to claw at me, Logan caught her wrist in midair. He didn't squeeze. He didn't twist. He just held it there, stopping her momentum dead in its tracks. Rachel looked up at him, her face twisted in shock. For 5 years, she had trained him to cower. She expected him to shrink away, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. But the man looking down at her wasn't the victim she knew. His eyes were clear. His jaw was set. He was looking at her not as his wife, but as a stranger who had tried to destroy him. "Let me go," she hissed, struggling against his grip, her nails digging into his suit sleeve. "Get out of my way, you pathetic loser." Logan didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned in close, so close that the microphone picked up the low, rumbling timbre of his voice, amplifying it for the entire ballroom to hear. "Do not touch my father," he said, "and do not ever touch me again. The game is over, Rachel. We know about the accounts. We know about the loan sharks. And we know about the bribe you paid Dr. Phipps. You are done." He released her wrist with a sharp shove that sent her stumbling back into her father. The crowd gasped. It was the sound of a spell breaking. The Sinclairs were not powerful. They were not untouchable. They were just small, scared thieves, standing in the spotlight of their own making, stripped of their lies and exposed to the world. The silence that followed Logan's declaration was heavy, hanging over the room, like a physical weight. But it was shattered a second later by the sound of the ballroom's main doors crashing open against the walls. It wasn't a polite entrance. It was a raid. A dozen men and women in dark windbreakers, emblazoned with those 3 terrifying letters, FBI, poured into the room, flanked by uniformed officers from the city precinct. The gala music died instantly, replaced by the heavy thud of tactical boots on the hardwood floor. Chief Miller walked point, his face set in stone. He marched straight down the center aisle, ignoring the gasps of the socialites who scrambled out of his way, clutching their pearls and expensive clutches. He climbed the stairs to the stage, his boots thumping a heavy rhythm of justice. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Carter Sinclair. "Carter Sinclair, you are under arrest for wire fraud, racketeering, and money laundering." Miller announced, his voice projecting without a microphone. Carter looked at the handcuffs swinging from Miller's belt, and his eyes rolled back in his head. He grabbed his chest, letting out a theatrical groan, and slumped to the floor. "My heart," he wheezed, clutching his tuxedo lapel. "I am having a heart attack. You are killing me. I need a doctor." It was a performance worthy of an award, but Miller had seen it 1,000 times. He didn't even blink. He reached down, grabbed Carter by the expensive collar of his jacket, and hauled him upright like a sack of flour. "Save it for the jury," Carter Miller growled. The paramedics can check you out in the holding cell. Stand up. The metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sharp final sound that signaled the end of his life as he knew it. Two officers grabbed his arms and began to drag him off the stage, his feet trailing uselessly on the carpet as he continued to moan. To my left, Rachel tried to run. She turned toward the side exit, her red dress swishing around her legs, but two female officers stepped out of the shadows to block her path. Rachel screamed a shrill, piercing sound that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. "It wasn't me," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at her father who was being dragged away. "It was him. He made me do it. I am a victim here. I didn't know anything about the money." One of the officers grabbed her arm and spun her around, forcing her hands behind her back. "Rachel Sinclair, you are under arrest for identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and felony child neglect," the officer recited. "We have the logs from the house. We know you left your children alone to come to this party." Rachel thrashed, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, raw hatred. "You cannot do this to me. Do you know who I am? My mother will sue you. Mom, do something." But Victoria Sinclair was nowhere to be seen. She had slipped into the crowd, trying to vanish only to be stopped by two agents near the coat check. And they weren't finished. Near the buffet table, trying to blend in with a waiter, was Dr. Theodore Phipps. He had come hoping to network, hoping to find his next bribe. Instead, he found O'Malley waiting for him. I watched from the stage as O'Malley tapped him on the shoulder and showed him a warrant. The doctor's face went white as a sheet. "Falsifying medical records is a felony, doctor," I heard O'Malley say. "I hope you like prison food." The ballroom was a chaotic sea of flashing cameras. Every guest had their phone out, recording the downfall of the dynasty. Carter was being dragged out, still feigning illness. Rachel was kicking and screaming, blaming everyone but herself. Logan stood beside me, watching them go. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just watched the people who had stolen 5 years of his life get loaded into the back of squad cars. It was over. The rot had been cut out. The silence in the law office was a stark contrast to the chaos of the ballroom 7 days ago. It was a quiet, heavy silence, the kind that smells of mahogany, expensive coffee, and absolute victory. O'Malley sat across from me, a mountain of paperwork organized into neat stacks between us. He looked like a man who had just eaten a very large, very satisfying meal. He tapped the top file with a thick finger and grinned. "The forensic accountants are having a field day, Gus," he rumbled. "It turns out Carter didn't just cook the books. He deep-fried them. The FBI found accounts in the Cayman Islands that were empty, and they found the loan shark debts that were very full. The entire Sinclair estate has been seized by the federal government under asset forfeiture laws. The cars, the jewelry, the art. It is all gone. They are destitute." I nodded, sipping my coffee. I didn't feel joy. I felt the satisfaction of a mechanic who had finally fixed a dangerous engine by removing the broken parts. "And the house?" I asked. O'Malley slid a blue folder across the table. That was the tricky part. Since Carter signed the deed over to the Russo crime family as collateral, the feds seized it immediately as proceeds of criminal activity. But since I have a friend in the asset forfeiture division who owed me a favor, and since the bank was desperate to unload a toxic asset, we worked out a deal. I opened the folder. Inside was the deed to the house on Elm Street. The house Logan had bought. The house his children grew up in. The house he was kicked out of. I looked at the sale price. It was a fraction of the market value. I pulled out my checkbook. I wrote the check without hesitation. I wasn't just buying a building. I was buying back my son's dignity. I was buying back the room where Leo and Sam learned to walk. "Done," I said, signing my name with a flourish. "Put it in Logan's name. Free and clear. No mortgages. No liens. It belongs to him now." O'Malley took the check. "Now for the criminal charges." The The district attorney is not in a negotiating mood. Carter is looking at 20 years for the federal charges. But Rachel. He paused, looking at his notes. Her lawyer tried to beg for house arrest. He tried to play the sympathy card, claiming she was a victim of her father's manipulation. And I asked, leaning forward. The judge didn't buy it, O'Malley said. Not after he saw the video of her screaming at the police, and definitely not after he read the report on the child neglect. The state is asking for 8 years, mandatory minimums for identity theft and fraud plus the endangerment charges. She's going to prison, Gus. She is going to trade her designer dresses for an orange jumpsuit until her children are teenagers. I leaned back in the leather chair. 8 years. It was a long time, but it was fair. She had tried to steal a lifetime from my son, and the boys I asked. The most important question. O'Malley smiled, a genuine soft expression that looked out of place on his rugged face. He handed me the final document. It was stamped with the seal of the family court. Sole legal and physical custody awarded to Logan Mercer, he read aloud. No visitation rights for the mother pending a parole hearing in 5 years. The restraining order is permanent. They are his Gus, 100%. I took the paper. My hands were shaking slightly. This was the receipt I had been waiting for. Not the money, not the house, but this. The safety of my grandchildren. Pack up the files, Mike, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. We are done here. I have a set of house keys to deliver, and I think Logan is waiting to take his boys home. The kitchen of the house on Elm Street smelled of rosemary garlic and something that had been missing for 5 long years. It smelled of peace. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, the same window where I had once planted a listening device to catch a thief. Now it just illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air and the 2 little boys who were currently arguing over who got the bigger drumstick. I sat at the head of the table watching them. Leo had sauce on his chin. Sam was trying to feed a piece of broccoli to the dog under the table. In the old days under the Sinclair regime, this kind of mess would have triggered a screaming match. Rachel would have worried about the upholstery. Carter would have sneered at the lack of discipline. But tonight, nobody was yelling. Logan walked in from the patio carrying a salad bowl. He looked 5 years younger. The gray pallor of stress was gone, replaced by a healthy tan. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a suit bought on credit. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and he looked like a king in his own castle. He set the bowl down and clapped a hand on my shoulder. The quarterly projections look good, Dad, he said, sitting down. We are up 12% since the launch, and this time the growth is organic. No loans, no leverage. I took a sip of my wine and raised an eyebrow. I know, son. I saw the books this morning. I noticed you tried to expense a client lunch that was a little over budget. We are going to have to talk about that. Logan laughed, a genuine deep sound that made the boys giggle. You are a tyrant, Gus. I am the CEO, and I still have to ask my dad for permission to buy a steak. You have to ask your CFO. I corrected him with a smile. And your CFO knows that the only way to stay free is to stay solvent. We build this brick by brick, Logan. No shortcuts. Not this time. He nodded, his expression turning serious for a moment. He looked at his sons, then back at me. I know, never again. We ate. We talked about school projects and soccer practice. We didn't talk about court dates. We didn't talk about prison sentences or visitation rights. That darkness was behind us, locked away in a cell 8 years long. As I watched them, I felt the weight of the small black notebook in my breast pocket. For decades, I had carried notebooks like this. They were always filled with numbers, debts, liabilities, and the cold hard math of hiding wealth. I had spent my life believing that assets were things you could count, things you could stack in a vault or hide in an offshore shell company. I thought security was a number on a balance sheet. I was wrong. I looked at Leo wiping his mouth with his sleeve. I looked at Sam laughing as the dog licked his hand. I looked at my son, a man who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. These were the assets. This moment, the safety of this room, the knowledge that no one was coming to take this away from us. You cannot audit love. You cannot put a valuation on the feeling of protecting your family from wolves. That is the only wealth that matters. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the notebook. I didn't need it anymore. The accounts were balanced. The debts were paid. The bad actors were written off. I placed the notebook on the table next to my empty plate. I closed the cover. It made a soft, final thud against the wood. "More chicken?" Grandpa Sam asked. I smiled, picking up the serving fork. "Yes, Sam. Pass your plate. We have plenty. We have everything we need. The audit is finished. The case is closed." The kitchen of the house on Elm Street smelled of rosemary garlic and something that had been missing for 5 long years. It smelled of peace. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, the same window where I had once planted a listening device to catch a thief. Now it just illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air and the 2 little boys who were currently arguing over who got the bigger drumstick. I sat at the head of the table watching them. Leo had sauce on his chin. Sam was trying to feed a piece of broccoli to the dog under the table. In the old days under the Sinclair regime, this kind of mess would have triggered a screaming match. Rachel would have worried about the upholstery. Carter would have sneered at the lack of discipline. But tonight, nobody was yelling. Logan walked in from the patio carrying a salad bowl. He looked 5 years younger. The gray pallor of stress was gone, replaced by a healthy tan. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a suit bought on credit. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and he looked like a king in his own castle. He set the bowl down and clapped a hand on my shoulder. "The quarterly projections look good, Dad," he said, sitting down. "We are up 12% since the launch, and this time the growth is organic. No loans, no leverage." I took a sip of my wine and raised an eyebrow. "I know, son. I saw the books this morning. I noticed you tried to expense a client lunch that was a little over budget. We are going to have to talk about that." Logan laughed, a genuine deep sound that made the boys giggle. "You are a tyrant, Gus. I am the CEO, and I still have to ask my dad for permission to buy a steak. You have to ask your CFO." I corrected him with a smile. "And your CFO knows that the only way to stay free is to stay solvent. We build this brick by brick, Logan. No shortcuts. Not this time." He nodded, his expression turning serious for a moment. He looked at his sons, then back at me. "I know. Never again." We ate. We talked about school projects and soccer practice. We didn't talk about court dates. We didn't talk about prison sentences or visitation rights. That darkness was behind us, locked away in a cell 8 years long. As I watched them, I felt the weight of the small black notebook in my breast pocket. For decades, I had carried notebooks like this. They were always filled with numbers, debts, liabilities, and the cold, hard math of hiding wealth. I had spent my life believing that assets were things you could count, things you could stack in a vault, or hide in an offshore shell company. I thought security was a number on a balance sheet. I was wrong. I looked at Leo wiping his mouth with his sleeve. I looked at Sam laughing as the dog licked his hand. I looked at my son, a man who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. These were the assets. This moment, the safety of this room, the knowledge that no one was coming to take this away from us. You cannot audit love. You cannot put a valuation on the feeling of protecting your family from wolves. That is the only wealth that matters. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the notebook. I didn't need it anymore. The accounts were balanced. The debts were paid. The bad actors were written off. I placed the notebook on the table next to my empty plate. I closed the cover. It made a soft final thud against the wood. "More chicken?" Grandpa Sam asked. I smiled, picking up the serving fork. Yes, Sam. Pass your plate. We have plenty. We have everything we need. The audit is finished. The case is closed. Here is the moral of the story and the call to action. The biggest lesson from this audit is that true wealth is not about what you show the world, but what you keep for yourself. The Sinclairs chased the illusion of status, the cars, the galas, the titles, and they paid for it with their freedom. We learned that you cannot negotiate with parasites. You must remove them. Financial literacy is your shield, but self-respect is your sword. Never let anyone leverage your love against you to fund their greed. In life as in business, the most important numbers are the ones that bring you peace, not just profit. Build a life you own, not one you owe. If you are ready to audit your own life and cut out the toxic debt, hit that follow button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.